What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to some more Bible reading, but not from here. Let me switch this over real quick. In the last chapter of Genesis that we read, which was chapter 40, Joseph was, still kind of in charge of things in the prison, and the Pharaoh's cupbearer and chief baker had been tossed in the prison there. They had some dreams. Joseph interpreted those dreams, and basically the two of them were then released from the prison. The cupbearer went back to his position, but then the baker wound up getting executed. As Joseph had foretold, it would be the case, with how he interpreted their dreams. So, now we get to chapter 41, which, as you can see from the first few words, says 2 full years later. So it's been at least that long that the cupbearer has sort of, for lack of a better way to put it, forgotten about Joseph. Joseph asked if he would, put in a good word with Pharaoh. But the cupbearer, probably caught up in the moment of being restored to his position, forgot about that. So, anyway, let's hop into this here and start chapter 41. So, starting with verse 1. 2 full years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. In his dream, he saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and begin grazing in the marsh grass. Then he saw even more cows come up behind them from the Nile, but these were scrawny and thin. These cows stood beside the fat cows on the riverbank. Then the scrawny, thin cows ate the 7 healthy, fat cows. At this point in the dream, Pharaoh woke up. So, basically, Pharaoh now, 2 years after the cupbearer is restored to his position, has a dream about these cows, and is probably wondering what it means. I think you might be able to guess where this is going based on what happened before with the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker, especially the cupbearer, because the cupbearer is still alive, and to the best of our knowledge, still alive and in his position as Pharaoh's chief cupbearer. Anyway, all right, moving right along, verse 5. Because, this chapter is quite a bit longer than the last one, so let me not talk too much in between the verses. All right, verse 5. But he fell asleep again and had a second dream. This time he saw 7 heads of grain, plump and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. Then 7 more heads of grain appeared, but these were shriveled and withered by the east wind. And these thin heads swallowed up the 7 plump, well-formed heads. Then Pharaoh woke up again and realized it was a dream. The next morning, Pharaoh was very disturbed by the dreams, so he called for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. When Pharaoh told them his dreams, not one of them could tell him what they meant. Okay, so second dream is very similar to the first one, and probably has the same meaning, but still, even given the similarities of the dreams, none of the magicians and wise men, as it says here, could find the interpretation of those dreams. Well, I think we know someone who interprets dreams. But let's just see what happens. Let's get to verse 9 here. Finally, the king's chief cupbearer spoke up. Today I have been reminded of my failure, he told Pharaoh. Some time ago, you were angry with the chief baker and me, and you imprisoned us in the palace of the captain of the guard. One night, the chief baker and I each had a dream, and each dream had its own meaning. There was a young Hebrew man with us in the prison who was a slave of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he told us that what each of our dreams meant. And everything happened just as he had predicted. I was restored to my position as cupbearer, and the chief baker was executed and impaled on a pole. So, cupbearer finally remembers that, oh yeah, right, there was this Joseph guy who interpreted my dream. I completely forgot about him until just now that we're on the subject of dreams and their meanings. So, yeah, at least he recognizes that, he, quote, was reminded of his failure. But, I mean, I don't know. I guess you could argue it's one of those better late than never kind of situations, but I imagine Joseph would have preferred not late at all. But hey, you know what? All things in due time. Especially in God's time. So, let's see what happens from here. Verse 14. Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was quickly brought from the prison. After he shaved and changed his clothes, he went in and stood before Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means. But I have heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. It is beyond my power to do this, Joseph replied, but God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. So, once again, Joseph is not really wanting to take the credit for himself with this, but attributing it to God, like he did with the other dreams. But I'm sure to Pharaoh, it's probably like, tomato, tomato. As long as I can get the meaning of my dream, fine. So, verse 17. So Pharaoh told Joseph his dream. In my dream, he said, I was standing on the bank of the Nile River, and I saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and begin grazing in the marsh grass. But then I saw 7 sick-looking cows, scrawny and thin, come up after them. I've never seen such sorry-looking animals in all the land of Egypt. These thin, scrawny cows ate the 7 fat cows. But afterward, you wouldn't have known it, for they were still as thin and scrawny as before. Then I woke up. So, that last little bit, it didn't even really mention before, I don't think. And I am so sorry if I keep hitting the microphone. But anyway, yeah, doesn't even say earlier on about the scrawny cows still staying thin and sickly looking after eating the fat cows. But Pharaoh mentions it here. Aside from that, it was the same dream. He's just telling Joseph what it was. All right, so verse 22. In my dream, I also saw 7 heads of grain, full and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. Then 7 more heads of grain appeared, but these were blighted, shriveled, and withered by the east wind. And the shriveled heads swallowed the 7 healthy heads. I told these dreams to the magicians, but no one could tell me what they mean. All right. So that one doesn't seem to have any further elaboration on what we read earlier in the chapter. But again, they still sound very similar to me. So I would think the interpretation is going to be basically the same. As to why the Bible would bother going through and repeating all this, despite the fact that we've already read it, one, probably for emphasis, and secondly, it's just the way the story would have flowed, I guess, because Joseph wouldn't have heard this stuff, so for the sake of being consistent with the story, Pharaoh now has to tell Joseph the dreams. And in any and all detail that he can remember. So anyway, verse 25. Joseph responded, "Both of Pharaoh's dreams mean the same thing. God is telling Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. The 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy heads of grain both represent 7 years of prosperity. The 7 thin, scrawny cows that came up later and the 7 thin heads of grain withered by the east wind represent 7 years of famine." Okay, so they do both mean the same thing. And that seems like a fairly, it doesn't seem like a stretch or anything like that to come up with that interpretation. But, I mean, it's one of those things where dreams are not always so obvious with their meanings and what's happening in them. So, yeah, anyway. All right, verse 28. "This will happen just as I have described it, for God has revealed to Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. The next 7 years will be a period of great prosperity throughout the land of Egypt. But afterward, there will be 7 years of famine so great that all the prosperity will be forgotten in Egypt. Famine will destroy the land. This famine will be so severe that even the memory of the good years will be erased. As for having 2 similar dreams, it means that these events have been decreed by God, and he will soon make them happen." That's where it's maybe slightly less obvious, especially the combination of both dreams just meaning that God is essentially hammering down the point and that it's going to happen soon. But the memory of the good years being erased further adds to the interpretation of why the sickly cows still looked sick after eating the fat cows. And so this is where the interpretation gets even a little more nuanced and less obvious, or, not so easy to just kind of come up with. So anyway, verse 33. "Therefore, Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land and let them collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years. Have them gather all the food produced in the good years that are just ahead and bring it to Pharaoh's storehouses. Store it away and guard it so there will be food in the cities. That way there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine come to the land of Egypt. Otherwise, this famine will destroy the land." So now Joseph's not only interpreting the dream and telling Pharaoh what it means, but he has a plan for how to, get past this famine that's coming up. Well, you can kind of see the little subheading there. But still, we'll read the verses anyway, because that's what we're here for. And, it'll give us more details. So, verse 37. Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, Can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours." So once again, Joseph, wherever he finds himself in Egypt, is, given a bunch of responsibility and privilege to go along with it. Just like he had in Potiphar's house, just like he had in the prison with the warden, and now the highest of all possibilities for Pharaoh and the entirety of Egypt. Anyway, verse 41. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen clothing and hung a gold chain around his neck. Then he had Joseph ride in the chariot reserved for his second in command. And wherever Joseph went, the command was shouted, "Kneel down." So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all of Egypt. And Pharaoh said to him, "I am Pharaoh, but no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval." So, further hammering home the point that Joseph is now like big wig, so to speak. Basically, vice president, for lack of a better way to put it, or like vice king, vice pharaoh, assistant pharaoh, whatever you want to call it. But literally second only to Pharaoh himself. Otherwise, he is to be given all the respect and honor and all of that would be due to someone who would be Pharaoh. Just a tiny step down from that. Anyway, verse 45. Then Pharaoh gave Joseph a new Egyptian name, Zaphenath-Paneah. He also gave him a wife whose name was Asenath. She was the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. So Joseph took charge of the entire land of Egypt. He was 30 years old when he began serving in the court of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And when Joseph left Pharaoh's presence, he inspected the entire land of Egypt. I assume when it says he left Pharaoh's presence there, it meant just like after that particular meeting. But, yeah, as usual, sorry for pronunciations possibly being weird. I wonder, so footnote on Zaphenath-Paneah or whatever it means, it just says probably means God speaks and lives. So, because of Joseph saying that, God is able to give the interpretation of the dream, and the interpretation seemed like, guided with knowledge and wisdom, that name was rather fitting because of what Joseph had essentially just shown to Pharaoh and his officials. Priest of On, Greek version reads of Heliopolis. The only reason it mentions the Greek version is probably because of the manuscripts that this would have been translated from. Because, yeah, sure, the original Greek Greek wasn't even a thing for the Bible until the New Testament, really. But when the gospel started to spread, from Jesus's disciples going around to various countries and parts of the world, there was then probably a desire for the Bible to be translated into some of those languages, Greek being one of them, probably one of the earlier ones. So while the earliest manuscripts of anything in the Bible were probably, written in Hebrew, some not quite so early versions of the manuscripts would have been Greek as well. Anyway, okay, moving right along now. Verse 47. As predicted, for 7 years the land produced bumper crops. During those years, Joseph gathered all the crops grown in Egypt and stored the grain from the surrounding fields in the cities. He piled up huge amounts of grain like sand on the seashore. Finally, he stopped keeping records because there was too much to measure. During this time, before the first of the famine years, 2 sons were born to Joseph and his wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. Joseph named his older son Manasseh, for he said, "God has made me forget all my troubles and everyone in my father's family." Joseph named his second son Ephraim, for he said, "God has made me fruitful in this land of my grief." And if you look at the name meanings down in footnotes, Manasseh sounds like a Hebrew term that means causing to forget, and Ephraim means something like fruitful. Yeah, those are gonna sound familiar when we get later on in the Bible, but whatever. Let's handle the now. All right. Verse 53, and this will be the last little chunk. At last, the 7 years of bumper crops throughout the land of Egypt had came to an end, whatever. Then the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had predicted. The famine also struck all the surrounding countries, but throughout Egypt there was plenty of food. Eventually, however, the famine spread throughout the land of Egypt as well. And when the people cried out to Pharaoh for food, he told them, "Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you." So with severe famine everywhere, Joseph opened up the storehouses and distributed grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout the land of Egypt. And people from all around came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe throughout the world. Throughout the world seems quite significant. I mean, it might have been just kind of throughout the known world at that time. But in any case, yeah, so the famine that was predicted was significant not only in Egypt, but like anywhere close by. So all these crops that were stored up for the 7 years of plenty, it's obviously had to be utilized because of how significant the famine was. But anyway, that is all we've got for now. I will say, that last verse is going to come up pretty soon here. But I won't get ahead of myself too much. Just note that is something to look out for in the chapters to come. So anyway, also, even during the famine, Joseph was still in charge of things. Because it's like, why wouldn't he have been? He was the one that helped predict all this and, adjust accordingly. Anyway, okay. I think that's pretty much going to do it for that chapter. I don't really have too many other additional thoughts. So, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video and want others to see it. Make sure you subscribe to my channel and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description as well for info on other social media pages and how to find and follow those. Those would hopefully also help with announcements of videos and live streams and that kind of stuff. And of course, leave comments down below with any thoughts that you have. So yeah, that's going to do it. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.